Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. First foremost, it appears Donald Trump has declared war on American cities. I don't know how else to put it. I don't know how else you describe saying you're going to surge federal law enforcement into American cities, the Department of Homeland Security, more FBI, ATF, the DEA, the U.S. Marshals, more tactical units like we saw in Portland. I don't know how else you can look at that. I don't know how else you look at that and say it's anything but an act of aggression. And, you know, I would say an act of war. I mean, it is an election year. And I want to not be hyperbolic, but this is, as I said yesterday, I believe the first step in stationing, militants out in front of polling places. For me, this is the first step in putting, big giant sandbag mounds with 50 caliber machine guns on street corners like you see in places like Mexico. This is bad. This is bad. And fortunately, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, said, under no circumstances is she going to allow Trump to bring troops into her city and terrorize her residents. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because obviously they're going to have to try and sue over this. They're going to have to go through our court system, which is heavily packed by Trumpkins. So will we see, jackbooted federal, thugs walking up and down our streets? And I know, but Rick, that's harsh. These are law enforcement professionals. No, these are militants. These are soldiers. These are people who don't enforce laws. These are people who do what we saw in Portland. They gang up on an individual. They slam them to the ground. They handcuff them and they disappear them. This is stuff that happens in places where you have dictators in charge. Now, understand, I've been saying all along that I believe that is his mindset. That is the Trump mindset. This is also a change of narrative. This is also a change of what we're talking about, because we're going to spend some time talking about how bad this is and how much this is a deviation from really the whole states' rights argument, and how the Republican Party, I'm still waiting for them. Yesterday, I didn't get to it, but former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge was very clear. Basically, over his dead body, would they send federal troops in if he were governor? I think he said something like there would be no way in hell that it would happen. Where are those Republicans? Look, I was never a huge Tom Ridge fan. He did some really bad things as governor of this state, but he at least ideologically bought into the things that they talked about, states' rights. The idea of the federal government usurping the power of the state and sending in basically soldiers is scary stuff to me, and should be to everybody. Because again, at what level do you break this down? Now, he said today it's going to be Chicago. Tomorrow could be Albuquerque. Albuquerque was thrown out. Could be then, go down the list of Democratic cities. Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Baltimore, Oakland. Just go down the list of cities that have really high poverty problems. And yes, violence problems. Today in Chicago, there was a funeral that saw 15 people get shot. That is true. Things have to be done to fix that. And it doesn't start with sending in the soldiers. It starts by something he did talk about: building factories in those cities, creating jobs and opportunity in those cities. But the idea of more of what we saw coming out of Portland and every major city in this country should scare everybody. Now they're calling it Operation Legend. Supposedly the name came from a 4-year-old who was shot in Kansas City. And look, every death is horrible. But this is only going to escalate things. And that's the plan. That's the point. And why? Why do they want to escalate it? Well, pretty simple. The virus is getting out of hand. In fact, during his briefing today, he's come around to the idea that, things are going to get bad, and they're going to get real bad. Basically, what we've been saying for the last couple of months, that get ready for the real explosion to hit, because again, we're not out of the first wave yet. We haven't hit wave number 2, which they claim will come in the fall. He's finally got it. Someone's finally explained that this is going to be really bad, so we need to change directions. So now the blame goes on. It was Memorial Day's fault. Then it was George Floyd, the guy who was killed in Minneapolis. He's the reason all those people are out in the streets. And of course, increased travel, because people at summertime, they're traveling, and also Mexico. Let's not forget Mexico. The country that was, their citizens were actually blocking roads leading into Mexico from the U.S. It's their fault. At no point was it his fault, which again, very, very telling and not surprising. I keep coming back to the one very simple thing. The Republicans have never had a plan here. Now, understand, Donald Trump is in the White House. He's the leadership. The Democrats in the House have thrown out a bunch of plans, a bunch of ideas, and they've gotten bills passed that the Republicans in the Senate have done nothing on. So when you say, you're just picking on the Republicans, I am, because they've done nothing. They didn't do their job. There are bills that could be passed that could do things. We could have stayed closed for a couple more weeks. We could have just held on for a little bit longer. But no. We had to have Trump out there squealing, we need to reopen. You had all these crazy right-wing governors, we need to reopen. And you got all the crazy people who voted for them going, no, we don't need no stinking masks. And now we're going to have an explosion. It's going to get progressively worse. And look, states, I think I saw 30 states right now have mask mandates. But you wouldn't know it by the number of people not doing it. So when I say they don't have a plan, they don't have a plan. They have no clue of what they're going to do, other than now we have to gin up the fear. We have to make people afraid. MS-13's around every corner, and Antifa's going to wait for Antifa to come back. They're coming. So this is a narrative change. And anyone who's watched this game play out, this is how the game's played. It's, hey, look over here, stupid, while all of the bad stuff over here happens. So here we have this moment where we're going to be sending troops, tactical units from DEA and Homeland Security. And there's going to be violence, and that's what's going to dominate the news. And I believe they think that the idea is that this is going to overshadow the number of people who are going to be dying from the virus. And what's interesting is during his press briefing today, of which there were no medical experts, not surprising. Again, another moment, not surprising, but no medical experts, because the medical experts are saying things are going to get bad. Trump was asked directly why Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci are no longer attending the press briefings. And Trump said, well, they briefed me. His idea, here's what he said. Because they're briefing me, I meet with them. I just spoke with Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx right outside, and they give me everything they know as of this point in time, and I'm giving the information to you, and I think it's probably a very concise way of doing it. No, I would rather hear from the doctors, because you're putting a political spin on it. You're putting your sunny disposition on 1,000 people died yesterday in the country because you boogered this all up. So the fact that we don't have these experts able to answer questions is kind of scary. And it hit today when I went to visit my family doctor, who I think of as one of the most level-headed, clear-eyed kind of thinkers that I know. He's not somebody who's radical on any side. He always has an interesting perspective. So whenever I get to see him, I always throw something out. And today it was about the virus. I said, what do you make of this? And he goes, I don't know what to make of it because we can't trust any of the information that's out there. We don't know what it is yet. We don't know how it affects, different groups. We're told a lot of different things, and we're told a lot of things on every angle. But he did say to me, he goes, at the end of it, when they say it's okay, open up again and stop wearing your masks, he goes, there's going to be at least one person wearing his mask and social distancing and washing his hands and following the CDC guidelines long after they say it's time to reopen. And he says, that's me. Because at the end of the day, it's still a political football. And it really got me thinking about the realities of where we are in this country. The destruction of our institutions, the destruction of truth, the destruction of facts, that everything is open for interpretation, and that you now have, after decades. Look, this isn't just Trump's doing. This is decades of Republican rhetoric. This is decades of conservative ideology. This is decades of libertarian mentality of tearing down institution and tearing down government and defunding and destroying. It's decades in the making. This is the mission accomplished moment for the anti-government crowd. The people who tell you, well, government can't do anything right. This is their proud achieving moment. This is what they've worked for all of these years. So it's not surprising that they're not doing anything to correct the problems, because they are the problems. So when the CDC is kind of appearing to be, back and forth a little bit, first don't wear masks, now wear masks, they take full advantage of that. You can't have an honest conversation about, well, why did they say not to go wear masks? Well, at the beginning, the reason was, and it was very simple. They didn't want all of the hoarders to go out and buy them all up, so that medical professionals and the people who needed them on the front lines couldn't get them. I mean, it is what it is. Is it horrible? Well, yeah. Is it bad policy? Sure. But it's making sure that those people that we need the most to have those masks got them. Now, we shouldn't have been in this position. There should have been stockpiles of these damn things, because viruses are not new. None of this is new. And this is kind of where my conversation with my doctor went. He was like, at the end of this, I don't trust the information, especially around schools, because, they're saying, kids, under 5, have worse outcomes. Kids in the middle have better outcomes. But then you see all these stories and these studies saying, well, maybe not. And he said, right now is the time to err a little bit on the side of caution, especially if you're someone who knows somebody who is in the risk categories. And this is where that whole hyper-individualism plays in. This hooray for me and the hell with everybody else that we've had since the 80s. I should be able to do whatever I want when I want, and the consequences for other people, that's their problem. That's a real problem in this country. The idea that I have the ultimate right to do whatever I want, and we don't. I mean, this illusion of freedom that we keep thinking that we have is quite remarkable. And most of the time when you ask people what freedom really is, it's freedom from government. When the sad reality is government policy is what gives you the ability, in most cases, to have some bit of freedom, some bit of autonomy. But I guess it's too hard to understand that, and it's too hard to grasp. But the question then becomes, do you feel comfortable with Donald Trump being the interpreter of what Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx tells him? And my answer is simply no. Because Trump is a guy who simply hears what he wants to hear and regurgitates what he wants, regardless of reality. And that's a bad thing. That is a bad thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, and get some thoughts from our good friend Sarah Kendzior on the declaration of war today, on maybe what this means. Quick break. Right back.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day a bomb rocked the Preparedness Day Parade in San Francisco, killing 10 and injuring at least 40. The Chamber of Commerce and the newly formed Law and Order Committee organized the parade to shore up support for war production and eventual entry into World War I. But isolationist sentiment in San Francisco remained strong. Anti-war activists prepared pamphlets and protests for the march. Many trade unionists were opposed to entry into the war. Some considered the parade a response to the combative longshoremen strike raging on the docks for weeks. San Francisco had been a strong union town for years, known for strikes and labor disputes. 1916 was an election year, and already the city had been rocked by a number of strikes. Business interests launched an open shop campaign and began targeting labor radicals. They found their scapegoats in labor leaders Tom Mooney and Warren Billings, who were framed and convicted for the bombings. Journalist Carl Nolte points out that Mooney and his assistant had been trying to organize workers at the city's largest streetcar company, United Railroads. He notes their convictions were based on perjured testimony and doctored evidence. Incredibly, one of the prosecution's star witnesses wasn't even in town that day. But the convictions served to vilify labor militants as terrorists. Fremont Older, editor of 2 local newspapers, discovered the frame-up evidence. He and many others, including Upton Sinclair and Clarence Darrow, campaigned for years to free the 2 men. They were finally released after 22 years in 1939. The actual bombers were never found, though some have speculated that anarchists of the Galleanist movement were likely responsible. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say I think that Operation Legend is the beginning of a war on American cities, that this administration sees this as their opportunity to change the narrative and to do what I think Trump has really wanted to do, and that's be a wartime president. And this is part of it. And I think every American should be really, really concerned by this. And here to share some thoughts on Operation Legend and some of the other insanity going on, I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. Writer, scholar, co-host of the fantastic podcast Gaslit Nation, also New York Times best-selling author of Hiding in Plain Sight and A View from Flyover Country, both fabulous books. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So am I being too alarmist that we're sending in Homeland Security, DEA, AFT, all of the letters into Chicago to start, maybe Albuquerque, maybe Cleveland, Baltimore, Milwaukee, and then the list goes on. Am I being hyperbolic, do you think?
No, you're not being hyperbolic. And actually, the way you phrased it was perfect, because Trump does want to be a wartime president, and the war was always intended to be on Americans. He is an anti-American president in every capacity. He was never here to serve the public. He was there to serve himself, to serve the Kremlin, and to serve a transnational mafia. And we're just, things that are in the way. We're just useless eaters, as they say. And so, this is just the culmination of a plan they've had for a long time. It's worth remembering that 1 week after inauguration, I think it was January 24th, 2017, Trump tweeted that he was sending federal troops to Chicago. He blamed Chicago's, high crime rate or something like that. And he didn't go on to actually fulfill this plan, but it's been in the works for a very long time. He talked about it during the campaign. It was something that Bannon wanted to do. And I think that he does have the support, not just of people like Barr and Kushner and Miller in this administration, fellow anti-American actors, but also of people like Bannon and Eric Prince, the mercenary, the brother of Betsy DeVos, guiding him from the sidelines. And so it's very dangerous. This isn't coming out of the blue. This is something he's wanted for a very long time.
Yeah, and you bring up Eric Prince, and I questioned yesterday whether the whoever we saw in Portland are part of that mercenary class that Prince employs, because we don't know, we still don't know who those are, and in Chicago, would we know what happens there either? And that's a huge question for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like that. He had some input and guidance because, as I said, this is something that's been in the works for years. He's been a key advisor in that capacity. But yeah, I mean, there's very little rigorous effort to investigate this. I'm seeing local newspapers trying to do the groundwork, whether in Portland on the ground or, one of the journalists from Kansas City was trying to get to the bar's claim of Kansas City crime going through the roof, which is completely not true. I don't see Congress doing much to act, and we're at a point of no return. People are being hurt right now. None of this is hypothetical. People are being kidnapped. People are being beaten by unidentified police forces. We had another warning that this was going to escalate last month in June when Trump tried to get the military to turn on American citizens. It's worth remembering that Trump idolizes the Tiananmen Square massacre. He sees that as something admirable. And so there were a lot of opportunities for the House, the Senate, federal officials, anyone to stop this or at least try to slow it. They've done very little. They won't cut the purse strings. They won't impeach the people in office like Barr, who are a central part of the problem. They won't try to impeach Trump. I mean, they're just doing nothing. It's citizens who are fighting for this country. It's people standing up. All sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds from all over the country are fighting to take their country back while the government just lets it die.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, because, today there was a story, 15 people in Chicago were shot attending a funeral of someone who was killed in a drive-by. The groundwork has been set for decades that places like Chicago are violent cities. Where I grew up in Cleveland, the message is always Cleveland's a violent city. Any of the big cities, especially run by Democrats, that message has been, decades long. Pretty much my entire lifetime, I've heard that messaging. So, doesn't this sell to the people who believe that the cities are dangerous and someone finally needs to do something?
Yeah, I mean, it sells to that base. And, not to tip off the Trump administration, but I live in the most dangerous city in America. I live in St. Louis. Don't tell them that that's the actual one and not Chicago. But, we were a petri dish for this horrific experiment 6 years ago in Ferguson when they brought, the escalated troops we had, the militarization of the county police and the local police, and eventually we had the National Guard here, incredible abuses of protesters, all live streamed, all put on TV for the entertainment of other Americans who, treated Hunger Games. And very little recourse. There weren't meaningful reforms. The instigator of all of it, the person who killed Michael Brown, Darren Wilson, was never punished. The local officials that facilitated it were never really they didn't face consequences. And I feel like that was kind of a trial run. You saw a lot of things play out then: the use of social media, the use of surveillance technologies. I think that Trump and his backers observed that very closely. I mean, we know they did. We also know that Russia observed it very closely, and I think they kind of used it to map the groundwork. And yeah, it definitely created or exacerbated, I should say, a dynamic here in Missouri of the dangerous city, the city full of violence and horror. We need to get further away. We need to move to the exurbs. It's the same white flight dynamic that, started in the 60s, got worse through the 70s and 80s. Trump's brain is basically trapped in 1987. It's like Roy Cohn died and he just froze in time. And so he's always thinking in terms of whatever would have dominated a New York tabloid in the late 80s, which was usually really horrific racist portrayals, young Black Americans, like the Central Park Five, who he wanted to execute. That's the kind of dynamic that they push and market and sell. And that's that. You're right that of course they're going to do this again, and there is an audience for it of Fox News watchers and disgruntled boomers and so forth.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that Joe Biden today came out and claimed that Donald Trump's the first racist president, and I don't know that that's true, but it did highlight the fact that we have a racist president.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the first. Like, the first was George Washington, who owned human beings. Like, he did other things that were obviously better than that, but you can't get past that. I mean, you have to acknowledge that. And I was kind of thinking about that, with Trump, you have this overtly racist, sociopathic, horrific president, and then with Biden, you have, kind of the typical American president who, mythologizes our history, downplays a serious problem, but of course lacks the, sociopathy, lacks the hatred for this country, actually does want in his way, to serve the country. So, but it's still a problem. I do think that they just need to be straightforward about how our country was founded. We're not exceptional. I mean, that's the thing that they need to, just stop pushing is American exceptionalism. Like, we were a slave-owning country, a country that committed genocide, a country that launched wars, just like all the other countries, not imbued with a special quality that keeps us from behaving horrifically, and it doesn't protect us from authoritarianism either. And that's been the mistake that everyone's made for the last 5 years, is just thinking that can't happen here. And I feel like it's linked to this broader, whitewashed version, literally and figuratively, of America.
Yeah. And the other part of this that catches my attention is that this is an election year. Trump is way behind. And the trusty old race card, when you got to pull the Republicans pull that out when they absolutely need it. And this kind of division is, I think, the only way they move forward. The only chance they've got in November.
I mean, I think the way that they're moving forward is by rigging the election. I think they push the racism, both because they believe in it. They are genuinely, these are white supremacist actors. They get off in a sadistic way on hurting people who aren't white, and they genuinely believe in this philosophy. But that aside, the racism is used to draw attention away from the criminality, which is very sophisticated, which involves, a lot of mechanisms in terms of election rigging, some of which tap into racism, things like voter suppression, obviously, but also foreign interference, hackable machines, everything they're doing to try to prevent people from voting by mail. Every time that they accuse, places of having voter fraud, they often do this to states like California, which are, heavily not white and full of immigrants. So again, it's linked back to this xenophobia. But I'm worried that they're just going to use cheating and brutal force, and that is going to be. They're not attempting to win. They're attempting to steal.
Right.
If they were attempting to win, he would make some effort to try to win over the American public by, say, not killing them with the coronavirus. Like, that would be a start. They're not concerned about that. They don't see this as a free and fair election. They see it as a done deal.
Yeah, and for me, the idea that they're going to send in a bunch of unmarked, uniformed, militant types, I see them standing in front of polling places come November 3rd.
Yes, absolutely. People should be paying attention to that, because I do think that voter intimidation is going to be another thing, another weapon in their arsenal. Because, one of the ways that people can fight back is by coming out to vote in massive numbers, because even if they're trying to steal and rig the election, you at least show, what is reality? What is Trump's basis of support? How many people are coming out to fight for their democracy during this time? Voting is a statement in a number of ways, and they're going to try to dissuade people from that by terrorizing them, both with weaponry, with perhaps, trying to spread the virus, with hate rhetoric, with all sorts of things. And, we've seen how police have been behaving. We've seen these paramilitary groups running around. People may be unprotected. And again, this is another reason they want to strike down voting by mail, because if you vote by mail, you manage to avoid all of these situations. And I'm glad Oregon has voting by mail. Us in Missouri and other states, not so much. It's a little more complicated.
Yeah, no, and that's the sad reality of our entire system. And you're right. I think it is partially, or mainly, how they're going to rig this election, and still to this point, and we've been talking for a couple of years now. First we started off with what was going on with the Russia during the 2016 election, of which we've done nothing to stop that this time around. And there was, I don't know if you saw this or not, but the UK had just come out with a report about Russia and the shenanigans that are going on in the UK. I guess they basically called the UK Russia's laundromat.
Yes.
And there was the one part in the article that caught my attention, and is that they didn't even look into at any level Russia's involvement in the Brexit vote, and they weren't going to because, well, it's over and done with now. And it just kind of struck me as this kind of this kind of moment of who are these people, and how much influence do the Russians not just have in the UK but here as well, because we're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my book Hiding in Plain Sight is about, and that's what Andrea and I have talked about a lot on Gaslit Nation. And one of the episodes we did is that Brexit and the 2016 election here were the same crime. They were done by the same people to the same effect, for the benefit of not just Kremlin but a transnational crime syndicate. And yes, finally, there's some admission that basically the UK does not have intelligence services, or they exist, but they don't work to protect the United Kingdom. They don't care about the protection of citizens or the protection even of it as a sovereign nation. They work as an ancillary agency for the protection of oligarchs, some of whom are British, but many of whom are not. And I think that that's essentially the same situation in the U.S. And I saw British people, ranging from journalists who've studied this and made their case a long time, and we're absolutely vindicated by this, like Carol Cadwalader or Luke Harding, both of whom have looked at Russia very closely. But I also saw just average people from the UK being like, oh my God, like, I'm just an idiot on Twitter, and I figured this out before MI6. And it's like, yeah, because it's not a subtle crime. Like, this is very easy to figure out. They did it, in plain sight. About it. They bragged about it. You saw things in the UK, like the Novichok poisoning attack in 2018 in Salisbury, where a British citizen was killed, and the British government did nothing. They barely investigated it. They didn't care. They know who the perpetrators were. It was two Russians working for the Russian government. No retaliation. I mean, that was when I realized NATO is dead. And so, one final point to make here is that if you've been online and you've seen a bunch of people saying, oh, the intel services are going to save us, or Mueller is going to save us, or, Five Eyes is going to save us, that's QAnon level nonsense. Like, that is, liberal QAnon, because none of these people, America or for their countries, they are working to please an oligarch class, and this is a mass delusion. The ones who did care are people like, Maria Ivanovich or Alexander Vindman or Fiona Hill, people who worked in national security who did make an effort to try to fight for this country and have already been purged. They're out. So, that was a propaganda operation, I think, to placate people by reassuring them that, intelligence services have got it. They didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, and the one part of the article, like, to highlight that, it said that the report reveals that no one in the government knew if Russia interfered in or sought to influence the Brexit referendum because they didn't want to know. And in fact, the one MP that they quoted said that the government was actually actively avoiding looking for evidence. And it's just and it's exactly what we've done. They've actively avoided even looking at the question and leaving us exposed once again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've obviously seen that from the Republican Party, because many of them are active, complicit actors in the plot. We also saw that during impeachment, where the House leadership had to be dragged to impeach and then tried their best to avoid the subject of Russia at all. They tried to make it around this very narrow incident with Ukraine. They're avoiding very serious things like the actions of the Russian mafia, which involves threats to federal officials, threats to judges. We have a Vichy Democratic Party. They're not a real opposition. I don't think that's true of most of the Democrats. I think most of them are deeply frustrated, and they'd let criminal actors to be held accountable, but they're held back by people like Pelosi and Schumer and some of the other House committee heads. They've got to get those folks out. I've tried to sort of be nice about this, but the time for being nice is over. They need to use every mechanism at their disposal, or this country will die. They need to use inherent contempt. They need to cut the purse strings. They need to state that this is fascism. The actual Speaker of the House won't even say that he's an aspiring fascist, that these are fascist tactics. Like, it needs to be said. The narrative needs to be truthful, and it needs to be clear, or else people will fall into that passive mode of, surely the government's got it covered. Surely, secret intel forces are working to say this. Like, we can't afford that level of delusional thinking anymore. We need to call out who is helping the American people and who is not.
Yeah, I've never been comfortable with the idea that the CIA was going to save me. I've never been comfortable with the idea that the FBI was going to be the heroes in all of this. And this is sadly where we are, where you've got the right wing saying, that's the deep state and we're against them. And then, the left automatically goes, no, we have to be on their side. It's just bizarre and stupid to me.
Yeah, because, one, there's no deep state in a sort of, I guess, a positive sense. I mean, I honestly don't think anything that secret can be positive in a democracy, but let's just say, secret heroes were lurking in the background. They suck at their job. They haven't done anything. It's been like 4 years, and people are dying. We have 150,000 dead Americans already. So, clearly they would need to, make their ranks a little bit stronger. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea is gross. Like, we're supposed to be in a representative democracy. The CIA and the FBI have been complicit in a number of, criminal and illicit behaviors in the past. They're not who I would want to go to for help in this particular situation. But you would think, okay, if somebody is going to be sneaky and evil and, illegally or whatnot, get rid of this administration in the way that they've deposed other administrations around the globe, that they would have done something by now. And clearly all they've done is help them. And, we have a national security crisis, like one that extends beyond Trump, one that involves people like Jared Kushner having access to classified information. Once I realized they weren't going to do anything about that, I basically felt like these are, enablers. These are people who are helping our country get stripped apart.
Yeah. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because I don't know if you saw the Wallace interview over the weekend. Trump said that maybe he'll take the election results to heart. And it got me to thinking, well, maybe he won't. What happens then? But more importantly, if Biden does win and he is put into power, will they hold any of these people accountable? I mean, I had hoped Obama would have held Wall Street accountable, and we'd have seen perp walks. I had hoped Clinton would go after the H.W. Bush and the Reagan folks. Nothing happened. Is this just going to be another one of those moments, you think, where all of this stuff is swept under the rug and we got to move forward and unite as a country kind of stuff?
I'm very worried that they're going to use that kind of deceitful rhetoric to say that we should not hold people accountable, that we need to move forward or it's too divisive. Like, look who's in charge now. You have Bill Barr, the Iran-Contra cover-up guy. You have John Yoo, a torture guy, from the Iraq War, who was never held accountable. John Bolton, never held accountable. Donald Trump, never held accountable. Roger Stone, vaguely and now just roaming free because Donald Trump was never held accountable. Like, when you don't hold people accountable, they not just get away with their crimes, they reemerge. It's like the same, setup as Celebrity Apprentice. Like, somebody like Trump drags them all up and, puts them into play, and they go on and they commit the same crimes again and again. And a country can only take so much of that. We're already falling apart at the seams. And so they need to be kept away from the helms of power, and they do need to be held accountable, because we need to set standards again of what is the rule of law and who follows it, and that people are not above the law. Like, that needs to be made very clear, because there will be no integrity left to this country. People are kind of clinging, to the remnants of the Constitution. They're clinging to the memories of the country that they had. They're not going to put up with that. So it would be a grave error if you did not pursue true accountability.
You don't fear that it would be just more divisiveness, and we would end up having the QAnons and all the crazy class, the well-armed crazy class in the streets?
They will, but you don't make decisions based on what, crazy violent people think about it. You make decisions based on the law and especially on the truth, because the law doesn't always reflect the truth. And honestly, QAnon, for all the nonsense that it spews about, JFK Jr. rising from the dead or whatever, they were right about Epstein. They're right about the phenomenon of child trafficking and blackmail operations and espionage operations. They're right that actors within the government for multiple decades have taken part in these operations and gotten away with them. And so I think if they are honest just about everything, if they lay it all out there and just let the chips fall where they may, and I think, the Republicans are going to be badly hurt by this, and so are some Democrats, but that's irrelevant. It's nonpartisan. It's about accountability. It's about justice. It is about protecting people from harm. That's at the heart of, handling the Epstein-Maxwell case. It's protecting, children and girls from harm. And with Russia, it's protecting our election integrity and our sovereignty from harm. And so if we look at it that way, as keeping people from getting hurt, making sure people don't suffer, hopefully that's something that everyone, including QAnon, can get on board with.
Well, that is the hope. And I agree with you. I hope they don't just sweep this under the rug. It would be a horrible thing. But Sarah, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you, always informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our good friend Sarah Kendzior. Make sure you check out their podcast, Gaslit Nation. Also her books, fantastic stuff. A View from Flyover Country, and the latest Hiding in Plain Sight. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to town.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. A group of labor leaders and members of the Workingmen's Party met in St. Louis. They were there because of the labor strike that had swept the nation. The United States was in the grip of a terrible depression. Railroad workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, had walked off the job after their wages were slashed. The popular uprising of workers spread to cities like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. Railroad tracks were ripped out of the ground. Workers rallied and protested, and workers from other industries joined the March of Labor. In St. Louis, the response of workers was even more radical. Many of the workers in the city were German immigrants. Some remembered the working class uprisings of 1848 in Germany. At the St. Louis meeting, they declared the start of the St. Louis Commune, a takeover of the city by working people. They called for the 8-hour day and the end of child labor. On both sides of the Mississippi River, both in St. Louis and East St. Louis, workers began a general strike. Railroad traffic was stopped. It was the first general strike in U.S. history. The workers had taken over St. Louis. 3,000 federal troops were amassed, along with thousands of gun thugs paid for by the railroad tycoons. The workers' rebellion was crushed. The strike committee was arrested, and at least 18 people were killed. Across the nation, 100 people lost their lives in the Great Upheaval of 1877. City leaders scrambled to build armories so they could quickly arm troops in case the workers rose up again.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, as many as 45 million people lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And, we're talking an enormous amount of people who lost jobs. And the one thing that I think helped, keep us from major economic catastrophe was the fact that Congress, the Democrats, pushed forward the $600 a week additional payment for unemployment. It was basically a lifeline. The lifeline of $600 a week that filled in the gaps that unemployment leaves. Because as you know, unemployment maybe replaces in good states, Pennsylvania being one of the good states, somewhere around 45% of your lost income. Maybe upwards of 50%, depending on where you fall. Other states replace about 30%. So that $600 a week that was the addition actually made unemployment livable for a short period of time, which was the great idea. Keep people home, make sure that they don't lose their homes, and have the water, the lights shut off, and all of that stuff. Well, here at the end of next week, I guess it is, that's the end. It's over. No more $600 a week, and we're going to see a massive hue and cry, because I don't know how you just pull that kind of revenue out of an economy. I don't know how you just yank the rug out from under what is now, they're saying, somewhere around 30 million, about 30 million workers who are collecting this benefit. And my problem is at a time when, since the pandemic began, our billionaire class has seen their collective wealth jump nearly $600 billion. So we're going to begrudge that worker who needs to stay home or hasn't been called back to work yet the $600 a week, so that we can give nearly 600 billion with a B to our heavy 600 billionaires. And a huge part of it, I go back to just the other day, Jeff Bezos saw his net worth jump by $13 billion in a single day. So you can't tell me that there isn't revenue out there. There isn't a way to make sure that people who lost their job through no fault of their own aren't made somewhat near whole. I'm a believer of they should have been made whole right from the start. Every person who was told not to go to work should have been paid 100% of their salary. But we don't think that way. And it got me thinking about this idea of freedom, because I've had a couple of people email me and say, well, I should have the freedom not to wear a mask. And it got me thinking about this world of what we're told is freedom. Understand, we're not free. You may think so. You get to make the minor decisions. Maybe what you're going to have for dinner tonight, if you're going to wake up at 6 or at 7. You get to make the minor decisions. The air you breathe, no choice there. The water you drink, what's in the food that you get most of the time. And then you can go down the list of all the other stuff. The tax rates, whether there's a social safety net, whether there are labor laws to protect workers, what corporations pocket, what kind of degradation and damage do they do to our country, what kind of tax breaks do we give them? I mean, there's just so much out there, and you go, but I'm free. I can say whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. Well, within reason, because still, that's the free speech thing. I love to remind people, your free speech rights are between you and your government, not between you and me. But this idea of freedom keeps being thrown at us at a moment when I see us as being less free than we've ever been in our lifetimes, or at least in my lifetime. And for a guy who's a labor guy like I am, I bring it all back to kitchen table economics. I know the right wing loves to talk about government running things like your kitchen table. I actually sit at a kitchen table and try and figure out, how am I going to pay my bills next month? How do I save for retirement? How do I save for emergencies? How do I pay this bill or that bill? How do I ensure that the car doesn't break down and I got money when it does? So I'm not free. I'm basically a victim of wage slavery like everyone else. And sadly, the idea of freedom on the workplace is another one of those things, as a labor guy, that I keep coming back to as an absolute must. And for decades, we have had no freedom in the workplace. And I point out every chance I get that here in Pennsylvania, when you look at workers' compensation law, they still talk about the master-servant relationships. It's still written there that the boss is the master and you, the worker, the lowly peon, you're the servant. And that's the dynamic that the employer class and the wealth class have always looked down on everybody else. And we're, in my lifetime, at the worst moment in that happening. Because union density is at its lowest point in my lifetime. The number of people who belong to unions at the lowest point in my lifetime. And we're now in the middle of a pandemic where, and I love this ridiculous frame of, if we give them that extra $600 a week, they're going to choose to stay home and they're not going to go get jobs. Without understanding how the unemployment system works, which is if you get called back to your job and you refuse to go, you quit. You don't get unemployment. But, never mind. Don't talk about that. This is one of these really weird times where everything that I've been talking about for the 15 years I've been doing this show, which is the working class is constantly getting screwed. You're not free. Stop that nonsense. You're basically a wage slave. And the labor that you do and the money that you earn is being siphoned off by the guy at the top. And it is no more clear than just what I started with. They're taking the $600 away that help people stay somewhat afloat. And we've got a billionaire class that's pocketed nearly $600 billion. Billion with a B, 9 zeros after a number. We're talking a really long freaking number. And yet we're still free. You've got the Republicans saying that they may pass something of a stimulus plan, but it has to give employer, I love this, immunity from any liability. So if they provide a crummy, dirty, disgusting, dangerous workplace, they're immune. You can't sue them. You can't go after them and hold them accountable because you're free. You see, you're free. You're free to take that job. You're free to work in deplorable conditions for poverty wages. You're free. As I said the other day, and I've been saying for years, they're moving us back to the days of the Lochner era, where liberty of contract, it was your freedom, your right, your liberty to work in deplorable conditions in unnamed numbers of hours for poverty wages, because that was your choice. Without the understanding that the entire system was rigged around that belief that you had freedom. That belief that you had choice. Because what choice do you have? Am I going to work for this guy who's working me 100 hours a week, paying poverty wages in horrible conditions, or that guy over there who's doing the exact same freaking thing? Because that's what the market is doing. The only time in this country's history that we actually saw a growing, prosperous working class was during the FDR years, where they put laws into place that actually put government on the side of workers for a brief little moment in history. It was just a blip on the timeline of history. But it grew the largest, most prosperous working class in history. My grandparents' generation. My grandparents went from living in the back of their car to leading a solid middle-class, working-class life, bought a home, raised children, raised a grandchild, lived and died in that home that was theirs to the day they died with dignity because they had some savings, they had a defined benefit pension, and they made decent wages during their lifetime. The next generation, my kids, I fear don't get anywhere close to that. I'm worried that I don't get close to that. So when we hear people talk about freedom over something as stupid as wearing a mask, my mind immediately goes back to, if we're going to talk about real freedom, let's talk about how do we get real freedom? How do we get freedom from hunger? How do we get freedom from want? How do we get freedom from homelessness? How do we get freedom from lack of health care? How do we get to being really free with real choices? We get this nonsense all the time. Well, you should have choice. I can have choice of a crappy, crumbling public school or a profiteering, crappy charter school in many areas. That's not a choice. That's like saying you can have the choice of being electrocuted or shot. Not really a choice. But that's what we're constantly being thrown at us. And every time we do step forward and demand something, what happens? You look at these Black Lives Matter protesters. The vast majority of them, I would say 95% of them, are peaceful, hardworking, America-loving, flag-waving patriots who are willing to step forward, stand in front of an authoritative, militarized police force, and say, we've got problems. Now, are there knuckleheads out there? Absolutely. And you deal with them. But to send in armed thugs to suppress their voice, to infringe on their freedom, I'm still curious where my Constitution toting, Gadsden flag waving, gun toting, Confederate flag wearing short moron friend is, who's going to talk to me about freedom. You know, we hear reports of teachers in right to work states who are talking out, who are speaking out about how dangerous it can be being disciplined, losing their jobs. And look, it's like anything. Without a union, without a contract, without that voice on the job, without real freedom, you're silenced. Now, I remember I had gone and done a remote at a teacher organization. It was, in fact, in the next hour, we're going to talk to one of the badass teacher association members. But it was their first like conference that they had. And there was a woman from Virginia who sat down and talked with me, would not give me her name, wouldn't tell me where in the state she lived, even asked if there was a way that I could distort her voice. She was that terrified that by speaking out, she could lose her job. By saying the things that she said, that she could lose her job. Even if they knew she was there, she believed she could be fired. That is not freedom. Today in my doctor's office, and my doctor was a single practice doctor. He had a partner, not really a partner. He had somebody who worked for him, but he was a small, sleepy town, small town doctor's office, taken over by a giant conglomerate now. And I had a union T-shirt on, a healthcare union T-shirt on, and the nurse goes to me, I would love to join the union. I said, well, I know a bunch of organizers. Go, oh, I don't want to get fired. And it was again that moment where you go back to freedom. If you really want to talk about freedom, you want to talk about liberty, it's got to start in the workplace. It's got to start with the empowerment that I have been fortunate with my entire working life. And I know I'm fortunate. I've never had a job that I didn't feel comfortable speaking up and speaking out. If something was unsafe, I pointed it out. If they did nothing about it, I demanded change. I can't imagine what it's like to work in those environments where, while believing that we're a free country, your entire life is at the whim of someone else. Is that freedom? Is that liberty? Is that the America we grew up believing in as kids? Is that the America that we wanted for our children and our grandchildren? And I come back to, no, it's not. To make the argument that I'm free because I can drive across the street or I can have, a hamburger instead of pizza, that's not freedom. You can do that anywhere in the world, just about. I'm talking about real freedom. The freedom to do and to think and to be who you are. We're not there yet. And I do believe in those words of the Constitution. I do believe in the aspiration of being a more perfect union with unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But how can you do any of those things when really you're not free? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
The Donald is in a funk. He's been outsmarted by an inert virus, his poll numbers are tanking, and even his demagogic pep rallies are falling flat. So, who to turn to for political comfort? Why, of course, Trump's true loyalists, his diehard cadre of Washington's corporate lobbyists. I don't merely mean those elites of K Street and Wall Street who dominate his cabinet. He also has a kitchen cabinet. Operating out of public view, it's an unofficial collection of highly paid influence peddlers who are still practicing the dark art of bending government power to the wishes of selfish corporate interests. Each of them is paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by brand-name clients, from Amazon to Walgreens, to get favors from Trump. In turn, these little-known lobbyists have now adopted the Donald as their chief client, funneling millions of special interest dollars into his re-election campaign, with the understanding that he will keep channeling tax breaks, regulatory exemptions, and public dollars to the corporate donors. It's the Washington money go-round, merrily corrupting our government. Who are these no-name corruptors? David Urban is one, considered the best-connected corporate huckster in the Trump swamp. An old college pal of a couple of cabinet officials, he's become such a close buddy of Donald himself that he's known as a Trump whisperer, able to work around the furies that rage in that strange orange head. Such cozy ties to the top mean Urban gets his calls returned, an invaluable asset for his favor-seeking clientele, including Raytheon, Goldman Sachs, Bayer, Nike, and Toyota. They, in turn, have made Urban rich, paying the once obscure lobbyists more than $25 million since the Trumpeteers took office. This is Jim Hightower saying, so Washington lobbyists are now the top backers of Trump 2020, hoping to get another 4-year ride on the corrupt money go-round.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this is one of those telling moments. There was a story coming out of St. Petersburg, Florida, that evidently Florida Senator Rick Scott, he's saying that, parents should have the choice to send their kids into schools, and we should reopen the schools, and they should have a choice, because we need the schools open because Donald Trump wants them. It was interesting that they found out that during a Fox Business interview that Scott's grandchildren will be doing the distance learning. They're going to keep their kids home. And it's one of these moments where I always say, what are the politicians advocating for, and what are they doing with their own families? They're keeping their kids home. They're keeping their kids safe. They're doing all of the things that the CDC says while advocating for the rest of us to just be, shepherded like sheep into a dangerous environment. And it's scary times. It is what it is. And as I said from the beginning, we'll be keeping our kids home, at least for the fall. But what's weird to me is we've been training teachers for a very long time to put their lives on the line, whether it's taking a bullet against a school shooter or now exposing themselves to a deadly virus. That's why I've asked Harley Litzelman to come talk with us. He's a teacher, education blogger. Got a new piece out. Cops don't keep kids safe at school. I highly recommend it. Harley, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello.
So walk me through this. I mean, we're in this weird moment where, according to your article, from day one, you're trained on how to take a bullet. Now they want you to get the virus.
Yeah, pretty bad, right?
It makes me wonder why anyone would want to be a teacher, Harley.
It's still fun. Most of my job is actually pretty great, and wouldn't trade it for anything. So I'd rather be alive to do it.
Got it. So walk me through the point of your article. I mean, I've been saying for a very long time that we don't need cops in schools. That's basically your premise, right?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was to kind of synthesize all of the research I could find through the lens of a teacher, to really make the case that cops do not keep kids safe at school. I was focusing mainly on school resource officers who are uniformed, sworn law enforcement officers, usually armed, who kind of walk around on campus and perform various duties. And I've always known that, when I personally was in high school and saw the, injustices performed by my SRO at school, as well as a teacher, I, knew that this officer had a net negative impact on my school environment when I was in high school and also as a teacher. And I also knew that there were many, many positive things that every other person on a campus did that did keep us safe.
Right. See, I'm in a little different. I'm in a little different situation. I grew up in a housing project, very, very dangerous area, high poverty rates. But I went to a Catholic school. We didn't have policemen. We didn't have security in the hallways. We had nuns with sticks. So I saw that as a little differently. We didn't need the cops. We had nuns. But I also don't remember, because I'm a little bit older, I don't remember having policemen in the school hallways anyway. You had truant officers rounding people up, taking them to school. But I don't ever remember there being, as a kid, cops walking up and down the hallway. And you see these videos all the time of cops overreacting and body slamming kids on the ground. I don't know how that's helpful.
Oh, it's not. It's extremely traumatizing, and the research more or less demonstrates that, draws a very strong correlation between that the more police officers you have on campus, the more negative outcomes you find in student performance, especially the performance of Black and brown students on campus.
Right. So,
and I think what you mentioned first is also interesting, that what I emphasize in the article is the myth of the thin blue line, right? The idea that instilled in us by every sort of state propaganda that police are the thin blue line maintaining our fragile civilization, defending it from the forces of chaos and crime and depravity. And it makes it very hard for us to imagine a world without police, or even a world with fewer police. And so it's so powerful, this propaganda, that we even forget that within our own lifetimes, there were fewer police in our lives, especially in schools. And many people, if you went to school if you were in high school before Columbine, very strong chance that there were no police in your school.
Right.
And it has skyrocketed since then, the number of police in schools. But once those police get into the school, the way the thin blue line works within the American psyche is it becomes almost impossible to imagine why we were safe to the extent we were without that police officer there.
So Columbine, you believe, is and I don't disagree, is that moment where school districts, oh my God, you got to have a good guy with a gun in our school.
Columbine was a major driving factor. There were other. You could link it also to just generally the war on crime, war on drugs, the crime reform, the 90s under Clinton, the myth of super predators. There had been a movement prior to Columbine, but in the research I've seen, the Columbine shooting was a major turning point to really normalize the growth of police in schools.
Yeah, because I remember the first time I saw an actual cop with a firearm in a school, I was taken aback, because I'm like, how does this help in de-escalating a situation? Because generally, in my view, it's always been my view that when you have that authoritarian figure there, that strong arm figure there, it escalates tensions, and I think makes things worse. And you go into this in your article a little bit about how teachers have been trained to de-escalate situations, especially in an active shooting situation.
Yes. I mentioned at the top of the article that before I learned a single technique in teaching as a student teacher in my credential program, I was first taught how to fight a school shooter. That was the first lesson I learned in my credential program before they let me into a single classroom, because I was told that was my job. And I was watched this video produced by the police, specifically the Santa Clara County Police Chiefs Association, saying it is your job to fight this school shooter. The police will arrive after the fact. So even the police know that, just through common sense, their own common sense, that they're not going to stop any school shooting.
Right.
And we've seen the examples of Marjorie the Stoneman Douglas High School, of the SRO who didn't stop that. There was an SRO at Columbine who didn't stop that. And these are anecdotal, but even the violence researchers and criminologists who study this show that the significant majority of school shootings or attempted school shootings are thwarted by unarmed staff and students.
So, is there a lesson there for the society as a whole? Because we're in this moment where you have thousands of people in the streets this evening who are talking about defunding the police departments and scaling back some of the over policing that has happened, especially in our poverty communities. Is there a lesson in there for them?
I mean, absolutely. I tried to write this article through the lens of police abolition. I personally am a police abolitionist, and I believe that safety is the product, whether in schools or in our communities, of the interconnectedness we have with one another that unites us, that binds us to one another in community. And those things that bind us together are weakened by the forces of poverty, trauma, capitalism, instability, and so forth.
Right. So let me ask you this then, because as an abolitionist, are we talking about completely doing away with the police? Are we talking about scaling back to Mayberry, if that's a reference you get, type things where you had one sheriff and a deputy in a town? Where do you see this abolition? Where's the line for you?
I mean, as an abolitionist, I drive my political imagination to imagine a world without police. And if you ask yourselves, I even ask my students this sometimes, like, imagine, regardless of what you think about the police, let's say they vanished overnight. What would we have to do differently to make us safe? And I fight for those things to move us in that direction, right? And one of those things is defunding the police, right? But looking at defunding as simply partial abolition, right? You cut a police department in half, you've abolished half the police department. Well, now we need to do other work in our communities. We need to invest in other services to make sure that our people are safe without turning them over to the police. And so, yes, my goal ultimately would be the abolition of borders, police, and prisons. But that requires doing the imaginative, creative, political work necessary to move us in that direction, which requires dismantling many of the systems that rely on the police to maintain quote-unquote order.
Right, but I like the idea in theory. I just don't see the practicality of it, because ultimately there are still going to be, whether we like it or not, there are going to be bad actors. There's always going to be some segment of the population that's going to be the bad actor that you do need some bit of defense from, I believe.
Well, the worst people ruining society right now are the ones in charge of it. The ones who are most policed by it are the ones suffering under the rule of those other people.
There's a note there, but ultimately, the fear that I think most people have when you start talking about doing away with their local police department is that things are going to run amok. How do you ensure that that doesn't happen? How do you envision that not happening?
I think what you said is it relies on fear. This entire regime of policing, whether in schools or elsewhere, relies on the fear of this unknown that asks us to the burden and punishment, suffering, and trauma of policing in fear of what liberation could look like.
Okay.
And so abolitionism is about moving past that and realizing what is it that actually keeps us safe on a day-to-day basis and making sure everyone has a guaranteed access to those connections, community, resources, services, and so forth.
Yeah, so you're way down the line, because the question that pops into my head now is, have you ever been the victim of a crime? One of those things that you were, because I get people saying to me, well, hey, I was mugged, in this place, and, we really need the police, or my house was robbed. And when I was a kid, our house was robbed like 20 times. And the police didn't stop it. So this is where you have my ear. They weren't there to stop it. They were there to take a report and say, well, sorry, you lost your stuff. But there are some folks who believe that police do stop some of that crime.
I mean, we can dive into the criminology that looks at the actual rate at which police prevent crime. But the bigger question is, why is this crime happening? That is always the question that abolitionists ask.
Right.
I have it right here, an excellent quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, which asks us, one second, where is it? What are the conditions under which it is more likely that people will resort to using violence and harm to solve problems? What can we do about it so that there is less harm? So it's about asking those questions. And when we ask those questions, we realize that the places that have the least crime are not the places with the most police. The places with the least crime are the places who have their basic needs met, that however, have their basic needs met, but also their basic wants met, and are allowed to make basic human mistakes without having their lives ruined.
Right.
And
No,
so
that's where I'm with you. I've always said,
Yeah.
if you want to solve, especially violent crime and gang crime, give people jobs, build those factories like Trump talked about today in places like Baltimore, give people hope and opportunity. I'm right there with you, but not all crime disappears. And I'm thinking of domestic violence, because I was just reading a report of the number of police officers killed this year is above what it was last year, and it's traffic stops and domestic violence mostly, and there were 7 ambushes. But this pops into my head of, how do you then deal with those societal problems in a situation where you don't have police answering those calls? Are we sending psychiatrists? Are we sending mental health professionals? What are we doing?
When we look at the rate at which people in mental health emergencies are overly policed, absolutely one of the things that abolitionists and others call for is the replacement of police with alternative emergency services who are trained to handle these situations safely. Absolutely. But even in more violent situations, such as domestic violence or sexual assault, many abolitionists are themselves the survivors of these types of violent crimes, who realized through their own encounters with the police and the criminal justice system that no part of this system was actually helpful to them as survivors. And it's often these folks, centering their own experiences, seeing that, no, actually, the police didn't help, the judge didn't help. No matter how violent the crime was to me, this still didn't repair the harm I experienced, the harm my community experienced, or help the perpetrator recognize the harm they did and how to do better. And when we look at the statistics around sexual violence, I mentioned in the article, when we look at just how few sexual assault perpetrators actually end up in prison, it becomes very, very clear that this constant specter, this constant threat issued against abolitionists to be like, what about the rapists? What about the rapists? The rapists are out there. They're not in prison. When we look at the rate at which people who commit sexual assault actually get incarcerated, we see it's very clear they're not getting incarcerated.
Right.
And so this idea that, like, oh, we need prisons, we need police to do away with these criminals and put them over there is completely mythic. It's mythological, but it's central to the notion of American freedom that somehow we can just do away with these individuals and we will do away with crime. And that's one of the important lessons of also Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who says in Golden Gulag that the prison is not a building over there, but a set of relationships that undermine rather than stabilize everyday lives everywhere. And I quote that specifically in my article because that is so central to the case to get rid of police in schools, but also anywhere else.
Yeah, last line of questioning I've got for you. Are there places that we're doing some of the things that you're talking about? Are there little laboratories of experiment going on with your ideas?
Well, one thing I mentioned is that I think it's like 57.1% of schools don't have cops in them. So they seem to be doing this experiment quite well. That's as of like 2015-16, so the number might be different now. But there are plenty of schools and plenty of places getting by just fine without police.
Yeah, and those are probably the schools that Florida Senator Rick Scott would send his grandkids to.
Probably, yeah. But again, 57% of schools, it's the majority here. So, like, the majority of schools are somehow getting by with essentially abolished police. But they're not abolished because they were never there in the first place. But there's examples internationally of places that have done away with police. There's Chilan, Mexico, comes to it as an example where they did away with police and instead had, semi-autonomous or autonomous sort of democratically run security and whatnot. And I'm not an expert on every single one of these international examples, but I just thought I'd ask if there was somewhere that you could point us to. But Harley, I appreciate the thoughts. Good conversation, and obviously something that'll be, I'm sure, kicked around here in the near future and as we go forward. I love the piece. I hope folks will take a look at it. Cops don't keep kids safe at school. We'll get links out of the Medium article so folks can take a look at it. Harley, I appreciate the time, man. All right, thank you.
Good stuff. Harley Litzelman, educator, blogger, one of our badass teacher friends. Like I said, check out the article. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day a bomb rocked the Preparedness Day Parade in San Francisco, killing 10 and injuring at least 40. The Chamber of Commerce and the newly formed Law and Order Committee organized the parade to shore up support for war production and eventual entry into World War I. But isolationist sentiment in San Francisco remained strong. Anti-war activists prepared pamphlets and protests for the march. Many trade unionists were opposed to entry into the war. Some considered the parade a response to the combative longshoremen strike raging on the docks for weeks. San Francisco had been a strong union town for years, known for strikes and labor disputes. 1916 was an election year, and already the city had been rocked by a number of strikes. Business interests launched an open shop campaign and began targeting labor radicals. They found their scapegoats in labor leaders Tom Mooney and Warren Billings, who were framed and convicted for the bombings. Journalist Carl Nolte points out that Mooney and his assistant had been trying to organize workers at the city's largest streetcar company, United Railroads. He notes their convictions were based on perjured testimony and doctored evidence. Incredibly, one of the prosecution's star witnesses wasn't even in town that day. But the convictions served to vilify labor militants as terrorists. Fremont Older, editor of 2 local newspapers, discovered the frame-up evidence. He and many others, including Upton Sinclair and Clarence Darrow, campaigned for years to free the 2 men. They were finally released after 22 years in 1939. The actual bombers were never found, though some have speculated that anarchists of the Galleanist movement were likely responsible. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's an interesting thought, the idea of abolishing the police department. As I've said it a number of times, and take this however you have to. I've never had what I would consider a positive interaction with a policeman. I've known a bunch of cops over the years, but in their official capacity, I don't know that I've had any of what I would call positive. I've had them where they do their jobs, and it is what it is. I've had a bunch of negative. I've had a bunch of scenarios where they showed up to mop up bad things, and I personally don't I don't know of a time where they prevented things. I am still a little leery of the idea of completely abolishing things because I do know bad people. I do know there is some of that. I just think, as I've said from the start, it's a tough job. It's a job that I was offered. I could have been a cop as a younger man. Wanted no part of it. I saw what it did to friends of mine. I saw what they became and turned into, and I wanted no part of that because it's a culture that is dominated by a certain mentality, us versus them. It's a certain kind of warlike thinking, and not questioning. But I'm still a little leery of the idea of abolishing it completely, because even in places where like the Wild West, where nobody had guns, they still had a sheriff to solve little disputes, because you're still going to have the drunken bar fights, you're still going to have the domestic violence, you're still going to have a lot of those things that go on that have to have someone who deals with situations as they come up. And for that, I am not envious of the job that policemen do, and I give them credit for being willing to do it on a certain level. That said, we've demanded too much, and we've put too much responsibility, faith, and unaccountability on them. I've yet to find anyone who thinks that the guy who killed George Floyd was anywhere near right. I've yet to find that. And if the police were to come forth and say, you know what, he screwed up. That's not how we do things. And had there been one of those other policemen who grabbed him at the time and said, hey, we've got him handcuffed. Let's move him along. We'd be in a different situation. And as I said the other night, and I got a couple of emails of people going, yeah, I didn't notice it. Until you mentioned it, I didn't notice it. You don't see people getting handcuffed standing up anymore. When I was a kid, you saw people being put up against the wall and they were handcuffed. Now, every video that you see of someone being handcuffed is slammed to the ground. They're tackled. Someone's got their arms. Someone's got their legs. And it's not just men, it's women as well. So, while I'm not in the abolitionist camp, I do get the idea. And as I've said a number of times, I was not overly fond of Clinton's putting 100,000 cops on the street, even though the minority communities wanted it because they were violent. And this is where the stuff from Chicago is coming from for Trump. There are voices in his head saying that people are clamoring for him to come in and be the great white knight. When the reality is people need jobs, they need opportunity, they need hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you buy the abolitionist idea? Do you think we should be doubling down and sending the military into inner cities? And would you want it in your community? I'd love to hear it. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
as the rain continues pouring in southern China. An expert warns the Three Gorges Dam is at risk of collapse.
Record rains and floods threaten world's largest dam.
The new British study touted as the strongest evidence yet that what's happening in the Arctic is human-caused climate change.
Siberian heat wave impossible without intervention by humans, new study finds. Plus,
we got to leave this little planet, leave this little piece of real estate a little greener, a little cleaner, and a little more peaceful. We got to do it.
Remembering civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis, champion of environmental justice.
All of those memories and more straight ahead from Bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And none of us, not one of us, can afford to be tired. Don't get weary.
I'm weary, Congressman. I'm very tired. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, with everything else going on in the world's largest dam may be about to collapse. Really?
Yes,
really?
Yes, really. Ominous warnings in China after more than a month of record-breaking torrential downpours have caused widespread deadly flooding. Authorities in central China blew up a dam on Sunday to release pressure behind it, and they have opened floodgates on the massive Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. As you say, the largest dam in the world, because water levels behind the massive structure are more than 50 feet above flood stage, threatening to collapse it.
Oh, good Lord.
More rain and flooding are forecast. Reports indicate around 2 million people have been evacuated, with alerts for major downstream cities like Wuhan and Shanghai, all during a pandemic. Estimated direct losses from the floods are already more than $7 billion US, according to the Chinese government.
Well, I'm only surprised it hasn't happened yet, to be frank.
And remember last month when parts of Siberia hit a record 100 degrees Fahrenheit?
I do.
Well, that record heat wave is still ongoing as Russian firefighters battle more than 40 large forest fires across the region. Now, a preliminary analysis of the record temperatures by an international team of researchers has concluded that human-caused climate change made Siberia's persistent heat 600 times more likely, and that this kind of prolonged intense heat event would happen less than once every 80,000 years if not for man-made climate change. They call it, quote, effectively impossible without human influence. And it has real human and economic impacts. The wildfires, destabilized permafrost causing infrastructure damage like that massive fuel spill from a broken fuel storage tank last month, and also an intense drought that has caused complete crop failure in 23 districts in Siberia's grain-growing region.
So, in other words, climate change in Siberia is really, really bad.
Yes.
Yes.
And extreme weather events like the record rainfall in China and record heat in the Arctic are in line with climate scientists' predictions of man-made global warming.
Well, knock me over with a feather.
Here in the U.S., a new study confirms earlier research finding that long-term exposure to toxic air pollution is a major risk factor in dying from COVID-19, and the study implicates the Trump administration's Environmental Protection Agency decision to freeze enforcement of pollution rules as a contributing factor. Researchers at American University measured a distinct increase in concentrations of toxic soot and ozone air pollution in counties with industrial facilities after the Trump EPA relaxed enforcement rules due to the coronavirus pandemic. Those counties saw a nearly 20% increase in daily death rates from COVID-19 through May, compared to counties with fewer polluting facilities.
Well, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany offered what I think is pretty much the slogan at this point for the Trump administration.
What's that?
The science should not stand in the way of this.
Ah, yes. And, of course, the strongest spike in deaths from coronavirus was in minority neighborhoods. The researchers say the evidence implicates the Trump EPA, suggesting that the enforcement freeze made the pandemic worse. Finally, civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis passed away late last week, and as part of his life's work to expand civil rights for Black Americans and all Americans, Lewis was also a champion for environmental justice, fighting the environmental racism at the heart of why minority and frontline communities disproportionately bear the brunt of industrial pollution and the accelerating impacts of climate change. In a fiery address in 2012, Congressman Lewis encouraged all Americans to never give up the fight.
Hang in there. Not just for this generation, but for generation yet unborn. We got to leave this little planet, leave this little piece of real estate a little greener, a little cleaner, and a little more peaceful. We got to do it. We have a right to know what is in the food we eat. We have a right to know what is in the water we drink. We have a right to know what is in the air we breathe. We can do it. We can do it.
He will be missed. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this situation with Yoho and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just bizarre. I mean, just really, really kind of bizarre if you stop and think about it. She is refusing to accept his apology, and I don't blame her. If you looked at his statement, which was just stupid, you know, I'm not going to apologize for my passions. Just plain flat ridiculous. But you know, it just shows how polarized we've become as a country. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, you know, the apology or unapology and all of the stuff going on. I've asked our good friend Bob Ney to come talk with us. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So you served a lot of years in Congress. Is this scenario, Yoho calling her, you know, the B word, is this unusual for congressional people?
Well, you know, I've seen somebody break somebody's finger at one time. I'm not so sure it was, intentional. They were having an argument in the back of the chamber. And I've seen a few things, but I just think that during my time there, nothing got to this point. Once in a while you might have something, but, I mean, this is just, using the vulgarity. He may not like her, and he can call her, unintelligent, dumb, whatever he wants to call her. But when you get into, what he said, it's just, no, I think this is starting into some new lows. I don't think it was that bad when I was there.
Yeah, because I'll be honest, I had thought maybe it was. Maybe because, you had the Gingrich people coming in, and there was that whole wave of, we're gonna upset the apple cart. But you're saying none of that. Okay.
Well, I mean, we would have incidences where, one time a congressman from Florida said something very offensive about the president. Not a curse word, but a British word. It's not really good. And we actually voted to take his words down, We did that, and right. He wouldn't apologize, so we didn't let him speak, and he was Republican. But this level, I mean, it's just once in a while you have something, but I think that it's just gone to new heights, I guess.
It's below the institution, but again, this is the weird moment we're in. Not surprised.
Right. Oh, yeah, I think anything goes. I mean, in today's world, you can say some things some people may take offensive, and I might even argue that, they're not offensive things, it's people's opinion.
Right.
But when you use offensive words, then that's different. It's something he shouldn't have done.
Yeah, not so much in the way of civility.
Right.
You can disagree, but this is the next step. Ohio, your home state. Oh, yeah. What's going on?
Well, this is fascinating, and I was looking how much national attention is this getting. It's getting some. This is bigger. This is bigger than what people are seeing, and it's going to get bigger. And in a nutshell, the Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, who, by the way, started out as a county commissioner in my congressional seat. I've known him since that period of time. And he went out under a cloud last time. The FBI was taking a look at him and a few people, but nothing ever happened. And then he came back and ran for state rep again in Perry County, and then he decided to become Speaker. Ohio has term limits, so people come in and out, and he decided to become Speaker. Well, then, this is the big key. I think this is the real interesting part of the story. Matt Borges, who was chairman of the Ohio Republican Party and a lobbyist, he was a lobbyist for First Energy Corporation in Akron, Ohio, and First Energy had some loser nuclear plants, right?
Right.
So they wanted a $1 billion bailout, billion plus bailout. So Matt Borges, their lobbyist, teamed up and they created a $61 million fund from First Energy into an account called Gen. And then Matt Borges took it a whole new level and actually threatened to blow somebody up, is what he ended up doing. So what happened was that they passed, Householder became Speaker using this $61 million slush fund, became Speaker. And by the way, it was a 501c4, a charity account, all right? So everything I'm about to tell you doesn't fit into the charity account.
Right.
And then they used the money for him to become Speaker. They dished the money out, not in contributions, but in ads for members and said, hey, vote for me. They even got some Democratic members to support Householder because he had some Republican opposition, which has happened before in Ohio's history, you know. And then after he got elected, they took the account and they used it for another purpose because they passed the bill, the bailout, and, of course, legislators owed him for him getting them elected. They passed the bill, and then a ballot petition came up. And when the ballot petition came up, they needed signatures to go to the ballot to say this is a bad bill. You know the process that happens in states. That's when Borges stepped in, and Borges, again, tried to bribe the head of the program that was trying to collect the signatures, and he said, I promise this will be worth your while. And then he said, I'm going to blow you up if it ever gets out about the payments. So they used the money. Then they used the money to take signature collectors and give them cash and fly them out of Ohio, give them $2,500 to leave Ohio. And it worked in some of the cases. So now this has been exposed. Matt Borges was John Kasich's right-hand everything. And when Kasich left and Trump got elected, they purged Borges out of the position of the chair of the Ohio Republican Party. So, he's a lobbyist. He's Kasich's right-hand guy. And the reason I mention that, I would be shocked now if the Democratic National Committee will allow John Kasich, and John Kasich has nothing to do with that $61 million fund, but he's connected to Borges. And I would really be surprised if, just due to that Kasich is allowed to speak at the convention.
He shouldn't be allowed to speak anyway. I mean, take his endorsement if you have to, but I just don't think he should be allowed to speak anyway. So,
and the big part of this, Rick, is that this is going to rock the Republican Party in Ohio. This is going to get uglier before the election, and this is just another something that nobody dreamed was going to happen. $61 million. I got in trouble over a trip difference of $7,000 in reporting, right?
Yeah.
This is a lot of people. They've got 4 to 5 indictments right now and more to come, and it's going to go through the legislature. This could literally blow the Republican Party up. And, of course, Ohio is a key state for Trump.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but isn't that what they said about the coins? Wasn't there a whole coin scandal that went on? And
Coingate.
There was a whole bunch of, scandal. I mean, the Ohio House there, they're not immune from scandal. It seems like there's a lot of it.
Right. It's happened over the years and different ones. This one's the largest in Ohio history. And again, I know everybody's innocent until, proven guilty. I did want to mention the reason, they came out, like, for example, my case and others, we weren't, a lot of people aren't indicted. They will plea or could be indicted. The Justice Department came out swinging and said, hi, here's the 5 people we're indicting today. And they have 2 years worth of wiretaps. Wow. 2 years worth of wiretaps. So they're pretty sure. When you come out with the indictment versus, trying to interview them and depose them and things, and you come out right with the indictment, then usually the government's, pretty sure of itself.
Yeah, they got their case. So let me go back to the $1 billion then, because, here's my problem. Pennsylvania, they tried to do the same thing because we've got 3 Mile Island. There was a whole bailout effort, that was trying to go through our General Assembly as well. It failed. I kind of hope that the governor had it passed would have, would have done away with it anyway. But I'm starting to go, could that have been something that went on here or in places like New York where they got a bailout? And I think Illinois got one as well. How pervasive could this scheme? How good big can it have gotten?
Well, I mean, it could have. In this one, I mean, this happened over a period of 3 years, and I think due to a tip of one of the people that were, head of the signature program that caught on. I think that's the only way they found it. So, you never know. I mean, a lot of things could go down and accounts created. And this raises another point, because you make a great point. How long are we going to allow for entities to be created, charity or not, like a 501c4, where you don't have to tell whose money's in there? I mean, how long do we want to do that, as a country?
Yeah,
and that's what happened. So there could be these funds all over the country. You're right.
Exactly. I hope they go to jail, and I hope it's for a very long time. And maybe it sends a message, maybe it doesn't. But the reality is, when you're talking that kind of cash, it could make a lot of people interested in moving on. But well, we'll see. But for me, do they not get that bailout money back? Is there a way of clawing that back, or is it just gone?
Well, Mike DeWine has called for Householder, the Speaker, to step down. And the next thing that's going to be very fascinating is what Governor DeWine will take as a position, which is starting to brew up, obviously, of people saying, all right, this was passed under the worst conditions, passed under fraud, taxpayers are paying for this, immediately cancel the bill, undo the bill, as an act of the legislature. So potentially, Rick, this could go back and be undone.
Yeah, I think it could.
And should.
Absolutely. Speaking of Ohio and DeWine, evidently today the news came out that starting, I guess, Thursday, there's going to be a mask mandate in Ohio, as Ohio saw a record new number of coronavirus cases. The mask, I guess, mandate will be for anyone over 10 years old. I guess there'll be some exemptions if you have a medical conditions, if you're playing sports, or if you're speaking at a religious ceremony.
Yes.
Those are the exemptions. Everybody else got to wear a mask.
Got to wear a mask. I had a friend of mine call me up tonight, and he said, I am not going to wear a mask, and what can happen to me? I said, well, you could get a fine, arrested. He said, well, I don't care. And I said, well, there's a problem, though. You're not going to be allowed in any business if you don't have a mask. They will turn you away.
Right.
If you don't have a mask.
Now, are there going to be fines, or are there teeth here? Because look, here in Pennsylvania, we got the same thing. If you're outside, you're supposed to have a mask on. That's what our governor said. But there are no teeth here.
Yeah, well, there's I'm going to say technically teeth to it. With a fine, there's technically teeth. But here's the point: will it be enforced?
Right.
Will authorities take the time? Police take the time to do it? I mean, they've got a lot of other things to do too. And so, how do you enforce this? I think probably though, if businesses allow, and this has happened in Ohio already, businesses allow people in and they're supposed to have a mask, then the businesses are getting fined. And of course, that's one way to, try to
let the fun begin. I guess more shootings at Walmarts and more women going pee in the lobby of Verizon.
Right. It's just, this is bizarre. I mean, the whole time. And of course, we were doing a mix match. Some counties had a mask, some counties didn't have a mask. Now, there's also a not mandated, but if you're coming back from 6 or 7 different states, including Florida, then you are supposed to self-quarantine in Ohio, but it's not mandated. It's requested.
Kind of taking like a minimal ground from New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey then.
Right.
I get it. All right. I want to get your thoughts real quick on today and Trump. For or against the idea of sending in, these, I don't know what they are, DEA, Homeland Security, AFT, into Chicago. Thoughts?
I'm against it, and I think a lot of people will be against it because of the fact that, if it's requested and you have a mayor that asks for help, it's happened before. It happened during the civil rights cases. It happened during the 70s, if they have a request. But to send them in, I mean, our own military has disagreed with this. Our own military. leaders have disagreed with this approach. I mean, why do it? And the other thing is, you can't pick out blue cities, and say, well, that's the one I'm going to go into. I mean, who really wants to do that? That is not even a veiled threat. I mean, it's an outward threat, and it shouldn't be done. If they're requested to go in, fine. And I think a lot of people are going to be on the Republican side. I'll speak for the Republican side. I think are going to be, frankly, quite nervous about this, because a lot of people, Republicans included, when polled, are not for this. This is not a law and order thing. This is the Fed saying, we're going to do this in your city, whether you request us or not.
Yeah, and to me, the Republican Party, and of which you used to be a member, they used to believe in states' rights. This seems like usurping the right of the states.
Right, and traditionally, a lot of Republicans, frankly, that I've known over the years, they really kind of don't like the idea of the federal government a lot.
Right.
Period.
It's just amazing to me. But my view is this is about changing the narrative away from the virus and how deadly it is, and getting us focused solely on race, and really changing it, and then setting up for November, where you can put these uniformed people out in front of polling places, in my view, to intimidate the vote. But that's a little more conspiracy than I'm sure you wanna take on.
Well, one thing I will say is that when the protests happened and there was some violence, there was some traction starting of people starting to have fear. Would there be some burning? Would there be in their town? Then there were the rumors they were coming to the rural areas. We had a rumor down in Belmont County where they asked for everything to be locked down because people in force were coming in buses, which never happened, by the way.
Antifa was coming. No, that happened here. One of the greatest things I've ever seen. A guy, people with their Confederate flags and their sidearms. They went to Gettysburg to defend the Confederate soldiers' graves from Antifa, who were going to come and burn American flags on the Confederate soldiers' graves. Right. And you go, but this is Gettysburg. There isn't one Confederate flag, isn't one Confederate soldier buried in Gettysburg.
Right. We had the same thing. And at that time, that started to work of people saying, Trump's for law and order, and this is going to get crazy, blah, blah, blah. Well, that all calmed down, and people didn't come into areas, et cetera. So now this is sort of like, as you said, it's a creation of we got to go in because there's a problem. I don't think people are going to buy it.
Yeah. And finally,
I don't think the fear factor's there.
And finally, since we're talking about chaos and causing more problems, I'm curious of your thoughts on the Trump administration wanting the Chinese to close their Houston consulate, and also the fact that they're accusing 2 Chinese hackers of vaccine data theft, seeking to arrest them. Any thoughts on this escalation going on with China?
Well, yes, I'm biased on this one. Whoever would be the president, anything you can do if you catch China on something, do it.
Right.
I mean, I'm one of those people. I remember they were trying to get our seaports, and we would all, not all of us, but a lot of us would fight against it, et cetera. And so I think on this one, if they're stealing intellectual property rights, there was the 2 hackers, because China's going to retaliate on us. They actually threw some of our reporters out, from the Wall Street Journal and some other, I don't know if they threw CNN out, but they threw some reporters out. So I'm kind of expecting this back and forth. And with China, I think you do have to stand at them a little bit. And, of course, they'll retaliate with us. So, yeah, anything like this, if they deserve it, I'm kind of on the side of don't take anything from China.
No, I'm right there with you. But, I guess the question then becomes, have we begun the next Cold War?
Well, I mean, that's very possible. I think at some point in time, the Trump administration thought they would have a deal by now. And I think that you're seeing, even if China deserves what just happened, I'll give the best example. They've been mingling in Tibet since 1959, and the Dalai Lama actually was not invited to the White House when Trump became president right away, which was the first time, right, in a long time. And now we're all over Tibet. Pompeo, Secretary of State, said that we're going to, they're doing stuff to Tibet. We're going to ban Chinese. Well, where have they been for, 3.5 years, So what you're seeing is the buildup of the Joe Biden loves Beijing campaign. So even if they were going to do some things, they're going to put it on steroids now because they're going to try to change the narrative from everything else. The fact that, Joe Biden, quote, lives in Beijing. I mean, that's what they're going to try to do in their ads and everything else. That's why you're seeing more aggressive policy.
I agree with you. Bob, as always, great stuff. I appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Love to hear your thoughts. Are we in the midst of the next Cold War? It's been coming for a while. Yeah, I think so. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. A group of labor leaders and members of the Workingmen's Party met in St. Louis. They were there because of the labor strike that had swept the nation. The United States was in the grip of a terrible depression. Railroad workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, had walked off the job after their wages were slashed. The popular uprising of workers spread to cities like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. Railroad tracks were ripped out of the ground. Workers rallied and protested, and workers from other industries joined the March of Labor. In St. Louis, the response of workers was even more radical. Many of the workers in the city were German immigrants. Some remembered the working class uprisings of 1848 in Germany. At the St. Louis meeting, they declared the start of the St. Louis Commune, a takeover of the city by working people. They called for the 8-hour day and the end of child labor. On both sides of the Mississippi River, both in St. Louis and East St. Louis, workers began a general strike. Railroad traffic was stopped. It was the first general strike in U.S. history. The workers had taken over St. Louis. 3,000 federal troops were amassed, along with thousands of gun thugs paid for by the railroad tycoons. The workers' rebellion was crushed. The strike committee was arrested, and at least 18 people were killed. Across the nation, 100 people lost their lives in the Great Upheaval of 1877. City leaders scrambled to build armories so they could quickly arm troops in case the workers rose up again.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the news out today, Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy has put forth a piece of legislation, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. He's joined by 47 other U.S. senators. They're saying it's bipartisan. And I went through and I looked at the names of the folks who, signed up for it. It's basically all the Democrats. And obviously Angus King, the independent, and Bernie Sanders, the independent. But the only Republican I found was Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. I'm still looking through it, and I'm not seeing any other. And it's interesting they say it's bipartisan. I guess one sane, rational for this moment Republican who thinks that we should be voting. But what it's going to do is it's going to undo all of the damage that the Shelby decision on the Supreme Court did and restore the Voting Rights Act. And it's something we need. Look, I'm expecting massive voter intimidation this fall. As I said at the beginning, I believe this exercise of sending in federal troops, federal agents, federal tactical units, whatever you want to call them, maybe even mercenaries, into our inner cities. I do see them being lined up at polling places to intimidate people from going in and actually voting, because they've done it before. This is one of those moments where they've done this before. They've sent unmarked cars to sit outside of polling places so that people will be uncomfortable and they won't hang around and stand in line and go vote. This is just, for me, that next step forward. But we do need to have a Voting Rights Act updated, and we need to do it in a way that we have multiple ways of casting our ballot, multiple ways of accessing our right to the franchise, be it week-long voting, be it mail-in ballots. There's got to be a better, easier way. Maybe even make Election Day a federal holiday where we shut things down. Maybe there is some of the answers. But only one Republican. I guess not surprising. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.